Welcome to my YouTube history channel, Utrace.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're literally traveling back over 2 centuries in time. We're going to explore the dramatic transformations and, more importantly, the daily realities of ordinary people living in India around the year 1800. This was an era of just massive, unprecedented change. Traditional economies were suddenly under immense pressure, and a foreign trading organization was actively transforming itself into a major political powerhouse.
So you might be wondering, what was India actually like back then? It's incredibly easy to look at history entirely from the top down, just focusing on the kings, the queens, and the conquering armies. But while giant empires like the Mughals were fracturing and new regional powers were rising up, how did millions of ordinary Indians actually go about their daily lives? How did they dress? How did they travel? And how did they make a living while the political map of the subcontinent was constantly shifting right beneath their feet? To truly wrap our heads around 1800s India, we kind of have to strip away everything that makes our modern world, well, modern. Picture this, a society completely devoid of electricity, cars, and the internet. Instead of just effortlessly switching on a light bulb, your entire evening depends on oil lamps, candles, and fires. The rhythm of your day isn't dictated by an alarm clock or a 9-to-5 schedule. It's dictated entirely by the sun and the demanding cycles of agricultural work. It's just a completely different foundational reality.
All right, let's get into it. Section 1. A shifting political landscape.
To understand the everyday stuff, we really have to look at the massive geopolitical shifts that were happening at the time. Think about this timeline. In 1608, Captain William Hawkins arrived in Surat on the English ship Hector with exactly one goal in mind, and that was trade. Back then, the English East India Company were just merchants, right? They were just competing with the Portuguese, the Dutch, and the French. But as the Mughal Empire started to decline, they saw an opening and began exploiting regional rivalries. The Battle of Plassey in 1757 and the Battle of Buxar in 1764 were absolute turning points. By 1800, they had fully transitioned from mere traders into a dominant political and military force.
Which brings us to Section 2, the village economy engine.
So, while these massive states were busy fighting for power, the vast majority of regular folks were grounded in rural communities, and these villages acted like highly self-sustaining hubs. It was like a giant interconnected puzzle. You didn't just have farmers growing rice, wheat, and sugarcane. The whole ecosystem relied equally on highly skilled artisanal labor. Potters, blacksmiths, weavers, dyers, and even barbers and washermen. Each person played a highly specific, vital role in keeping this localized economy running smoothly day in and day out.
And we shouldn't mistake this for some primitive setup. Actually, scratch that. It was a highly sophisticated commercial network. Long before digital banking or wire transfers were even a thought, Indians were connecting local markets with global trade. They used this really complex mix of everyday coins for things like wages and taxes, alongside sophisticated credit arrangements and direct agricultural barter. It was a fluid, functional, and very real financial system.
But, and this is a big but, life was deeply precarious, especially if you were a farmer. Their immediate survival relied entirely on unpredictable monsoons. Now add to that the East India Company's heavy and honestly sometimes crushing land revenue demands. Plus, they were being forced to grow cash crops like indigo and opium instead of food. Because of this immense pressure, many cultivators simply couldn't pay up, and they fell into generational debt with powerful rural moneylenders.
Let's shift gears a bit. Section 3. Daily life and culture. If you were to take a walk through an Indian town back then, the first thing you'd notice is the sheer variety. There was absolutely no single Indian dress or typical home. Clothing varied wildly depending on your region, your wealth, and the climate. Men wore things like dhotis, kurtas, ankarkas, and turbans, while women wore regional variations of saris. And as for housing, while the big cities featured impressive stone palaces and beautiful mosques, most ordinary rural homes were built practically from whatever was locally available, mostly mud, bamboo, thatch, and timber.
And speaking of those cities, far from being purely agricultural, India boasted massive urban centers like Delhi, Surat, Patna, and Madras. These places were absolutely buzzing hubs of manufacturing. India possessed incredibly skilled artisans. Their textiles, jewelry, and metal goods weren't just everyday items. They were the ultimate luxury goods in Europe. Local Indian merchants were operating massive international trading networks that spanned across Asia, Africa, and Europe.
But actually getting between those bustling hubs, that was a real ordeal. Forget modern traffic jams. Your daily commute back then meant passing through vast, wild landscapes that you shared with tigers, leopards, and rhinos. Travel across the extensive networks of roads and rivers relied entirely on walking,
boats, or bullock carts. Journeys that take us hours today took weeks or even months back then. And while there was localized smoke from fires and some deforestation, the upside was a landscape completely free of modern industrial pollution.
Let's dive a bit deeper into the social fabric. Section 4. Society, Faith, and Divisions.
Everyday life was profoundly anchored in diverse faiths. Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, Jains, and Buddhists all followed distinct, vibrant traditions. Social life revolved almost entirely around local festivals, temples, and mosques. Even what people ate was deeply tied to their geography. Diets were strictly seasonal and local. You'd see rice dominating the east and south, and wheat up in the north. It was this incredibly rich culture of community and storytelling.
But we also have to acknowledge the harsh realities here. This society was defined by deeply rooted inequalities. The traditional four-varna framework, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, along with countless local jatis, heavily dictated a person's occupation, their marriage prospects, and their overall social status. These existing social divisions were later classified and politically manipulated by British policies. And of course, these were the very same inequalities that 20th century reformers like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar would later fiercely fight against to champion social justice.
And education? Kind of a similar story of inequality. Sure, traditional educational institutions absolutely existed. You had places like pathshalas, gurukuls, and madrasas teaching everything from mathematics and accounting to religion and philosophy. But mass modern education as we know it simply did not exist. Overall literacy was quite low compared to today, and there were severe, systemic access barriers that largely prevented women and disadvantaged communities from receiving any formal schooling at all.
Okay, let's zoom back out to the macro level. Section 5. Rise of the company.
So, here is the million-dollar question. How on earth did a foreign trading company manage to conquer this vast, fragmented subcontinent? Well, they had a pretty ruthless, incredibly effective four-step playbook. Step 1. Recruit a massive army of Indian soldiers, known as sepoys. Step 2. Build strategic forts and administrative centers. Step 3. Use diplomacy to negotiate treaties, or just aggressively fight wars when that failed. And Step 4. Extract immense land revenue from those newly conquered territories to fund the entire cycle all over again.
Using this exact playbook, they systematically absorbed Bengal, the South, the West, and the North throughout the early 1800s. But this aggressive expansion spread like wildfire, and eventually it hit a violent breaking point. In 1857, a massive uprising erupted across northern and central India against company rule. This rebellion was so significant that it ultimately forced the British government to end the East India Company's rule entirely, transferring official authority directly to the British Crown in 1858.
As we wrap up this explainer, there's this one quote from the source material that really hits the nail on the head. It highlights the incredible resilience of the Indian people through this chaotic era. Amidst changing empires, shifting borders, and rising foreign powers, millions of ordinary people simply continued to build their homes, raise their families, and celebrate their festivals. Their daily perseverance, getting through the grind day in and day out, is truly the most fascinating part of this history.
The India of 1800 was just this deeply complex world. It was full of harsh realities and severe inequalities, for sure, but also incredibly resilient communities and beautiful, rich traditions. So think about it. When you strip away all our modern technology, would you have been able to survive those precarious economic rhythms and wild landscapes? I'd love to know what part of this history surprised you the most. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today.
Your support means a lot. See you in the next video.